Cloverfield, and with us today is Lauren Panepinto, Art Director for Orbit Books, and this year's winner of the Chesley Award for Best Art Director.
Hello.
Hi, congratulations on your win, Lauren.
Thank you.
Let's jump in with some questions. How did you get interested in art?
My grandfather, my dad's dad, was my primary babysitter, kind of after school. And he was an amateur artist. His dream had always been to study fine art, but he was in World War II, and when he was a teenager, and he got injured, and he was paralyzed from the waist down. So his plan was he signed up to go to World War II, to go to Germany, and then he was going to study in Italy afterwards, where my family's Italian. And then because he got hurt, he got sent home. So it always ended up just being an amateur thing, but he was always painting and doing art. And we would watch Bob Ross together almost every afternoon that I stayed with him. And I try and draw along, and, so he was the first one that was really making me think about art and making me draw all the time. And then, just stayed with it. I thought, through high school, I was very into comic books, and I ended up hanging out at the comic book store so much in my hometown that they hired me, and then I worked in the comic book store, and one thing led to another. I would draw all the time, and I really like science, so I thought that I was going to be a medical illustrator. I started school with a pre-med art double major, and then I just ended up in art, and the science was fine, but pre-med lifestyle was not for me.
Yeah, it's not for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's unfortunately liking science is not enough, and being interested in medicine is not enough. You really have to have to get through the schooling, you have to have this really cutthroat killer mentality, and want to be doing that for the next 50 years of your life, and I couldn't do it. So
yeah, it takes a lot of dedication.
So I ended up in science fiction art instead of science art.
What led you to becoming an art director?
Well, in graphic design, I had a hard time figuring out what my path was in art, because I didn't have experience with, everybody has experience with graphic design, but you don't realize it's graphic design unless you're kind of told it's graphic design. So I took a lot of art classes, and in my head, you could be a fine artist or you could be an illustrator. And I never really thought about all the type and all that stuff. And I was doing graphic design, and I didn't realize it. I didn't know what to call it, because in high school, all my friends had bands, and I am completely tone deaf, but I was doing their t-shirts and their posters and their logos, and I was the person that drew everything. And then I was in the comic book store, and I was always copying, logos of comic books, like X-Men logos and stuff. And I was such a graphic designer, naturally, but I didn't know what it was called or what that thing was. So I finally wandered into a graphic design class, and I was thunderstruck. I was like, oh, this is the thing.
You can do this for a living. Yeah.
And there are a lot of graphic designers that are honest, and this is no shame, no slight or shame, that are really illustrators that like graphic design too, and like a steady job. But there are some of us that are just type and layout and logo nerds. And once I figured out what it was called, then I just honed in, and that was what I studied. So in graphic design, if you get into publishing, which, kind of always being a book nerd, I was going to School of Visual Arts. I finished at School of Visual Arts in Manhattan. And what's great about School of Visual Arts is all your teachers are working professionals. So, through a teacher, I was getting ready to look for a job as I was graduating, and a teacher knew about an opening at St. Martin's Press, which is right on 23rd and Broadway, and School of Visual Arts is on 23rd and 3rd. So he literally called someone and was like, I got somebody for you. And I walked down the block and interviewed and got the job. And I've been in books ever since. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So in a typical year, how many assignments are you responsible for? That's kind of a technical.
Yeah. All right. So, it's complicated because I touch probably about 75 books a season. but some of those are, people want to know how many book designs are you doing kind of a season. So a season
Yeah.
could be twice a year. Now we just switched to 3 times a year. Depends on the house. So like in a year, I probably touch 200 books, but a lot of them are second format, so hardcover to paperback, and you don't always
Yeah.
design those. I probably do about 100 brand new from scratch books a year, kind of things.
That sounds like a lot.
It is a lot. I mean, I don't do all that myself. I have a team and I hire a lot of freelance artists as well. So I didn't actually finish the art director question. So
yeah.
In publishing design, you start as like a junior designer, and nobody lets you touch a cover yet, but other people are designing covers, and then they give you the cover file, and then you make the mechanical, which is the back and the spine and the flaps if it's a hardcover, or just the back and the spine if it's a trade paperback, and that's how you learn. So eventually you start doing your own covers, and then you get better at that, and maybe you do some marketing design along the way that I did, and you kind of work your way up to just designing covers, and other people do mechanicals for you mostly. And you get more and more experience doing cover design, that you're kind of learning under an art director. And the difference between a senior designer and an art director is a senior designer only works on, like, they don't direct freelancers. They don't direct other artists. They just either get the pieces from that artist, or they design covers completely on their own through found imagery and stuff like that. But when you start hiring freelancers and directing them, and kind of also it's both ways at once. So you're directing down and hiring people and figuring out what people to hire, and helping them create the piece of art that then comes back to you. But you're also kind of getting directed or directing up, so that you also, it's part of your job to figure out what the cover should be with the editor and the publisher and the author. And so you're kind of a lot more involved. Like, it's a senior designer, you're kind of just involved in designing the cover, and once you take those steps into art direction, it's more like managing the whole process. So
yeah
it's just time and mentorship and learning. So like 100 books a year. But again, like, I'm directing designers that just work on covers. I'm also working with freelance artists and things like that, and like talking, like managing that kind of whole process.
The whole process line was like from the artist, and then to the working with the publisher and the author to get them, make sure everything goes the way they want it to. And because I think a lot of people may not understand what the art director's job is, and so I think that's that's a good explanation.
I think it's funny because a lot of artists don't always understand what an art director's job is. Like, artists a lot of times think that the art director is the boss. Like, the art director is the hurdle, kind of like the art director is approving or not approving what you do. And to a degree we do, but really what an art director is your coach. So I think of like, like if it's Rocky, I would be Mickey, like the artist is the like going in and punching, but the art director is like coaching and saying, okay, well, you want to hit him with, I don't know why I'm so violent this morning. You want to hit him with a right hook, but also, you're training them to, you're like feeding them the information. Like, really, like, an art director is kind of like a crisis negotiator and a UN diplomat, kind of all at the same time, because you have all these folks that talk words, so editors, authors, publishers, and then you have all of these artists that talk visual, and they don't, it's not the same language, so you're kind of consistently translating back and forth. You're condensing what all of these folks are saying down to what the artist needs to know to do the best piece of art, kind of.
Okay, well, this is asking what the process for a book cover and what the time frame do you usually have is, and I think we got into a little bit of the process there, but a little bit, but not like real detailed.
So, I could sketch it out. Editors are always acquiring books, so that happens through a lot of different ways. A lot of times they have an author already in, it's already an orbit author, and they have a new idea for a book, or an agent will bring a manuscript to an editor. There's very little, I mean, some places do, it depends on the house. Some places take unsolicited manuscripts, which means like people can just send them in, but most stuff comes in through agents, because agents are kind of the first coaching step for editors, for authors rather. So their agents are kind of almost the same kind of job as art directors, but between authors and editors. So editors are always working on what group of covers is or group of books is going to be in a season. So they're kind of working on the season. And once they've got that kind of together, then they present what those books are going to be to art, to me, and you know, the rest of my team sits with me. And they have a form that we've kind of worked up that helps them, you know, like what's the setting, what's the title, like what's the, you know, the nitty gritty, and we just talk about it, you know, and everything really, people always ask, you know, how do you decide if something's going to be a photo or something's going to be an illustration or something's just going to be designed with type. And it's always about what the trends are in that target audience. So you've really got to think about who's going to read this book. Like, who is your meat and potatoes audience? Like, who do you really want to reach? And then you also think about, it's my job to know what else those folks are looking at. So, for example, something like The Witcher, you know, like the Witcher books existed before the game, but you know, a lot of video game people, a lot of video game fans now. I mean, there's also a Netflix show, but
which my kids were obsessed with. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. So, you know, like that, like adventure fantasy, as we call it, like is kind of like what The Witcher is. And it's more about a character. And, you know, that group of folks are very into D&D and they're very into video games. So you kind of want the art to appeal to that audience. Like when Game of Thrones first came out on HBO, there were a lot of people that were suddenly Game of Thrones fans that had never thought of themselves as fantasy fans before. So, you know, book covers shifted a little to look more like very photographic, to look a lot like the promotional posters from Game of Thrones. So the target audience like kind of recognizes a bit of what they're looking for. So you're kind of always playing that game. And like within sci-fi fantasy, there's so many subgenres. There's space opera, which has certain trends, and, you know, zombies and horror that have certain trends. And, you know, you've got to kind of know as an art director what all those trends are doing all the time. And like, so the editor and us we're all talking about that, like what the target audience is and then what they're also looking at right now. And then you've got to kind of decide, you know, how much you're going to push the envelope. Like, and that really comes from the book too. Like if it's a book that's very groundbreaking or very just like meat and potatoes fantasy, you know, like you're kind of feeling all that out with the editor. So that's what those meetings are about. And then I take all that kind of that information away and I sit with my team and, you know, I do most of the art direction for Orbit. We don't have a very big art team. So what I do then is if it's going to be a designer, you know, I talk about whether my designer's going to do it, I'm going to do it, you know, one of the other folks is going to do it. But if it's, if we're hiring a freelancer, which is kind of what the Chesley is more about, you know, the Chesley community is sci-fi and fantasy artists. So when they're picking an art director, I think they're really looking at like what covers I did that year that have been freelanced out to artists, obviously. So when we decide that something is going to be illustrated, I get to control the choices. So I say, okay, well, this is the kind of cover we want. It's either going to be a character or it's going to be a landscape or it's going to be some kind of tech or a ship or some kind of, you know, like a big sword or something. We kind of know that in advance. And I say, okay, well, who's working in this field that feels like the right artist for this book? You know, and that can be all kinds of things. You know, does it have a horse on it? Well, there's some people that are really good at horses, you know, like, and I'm usually pitching, I will come back into a cover meeting and pitch, you know, 3-4 different illustrators. And it's not like who's better. It's very different voices, like their styles are different.
Yeah,
so they're kind of all doing, they're all doing like a character, or they're all doing horses. They're all doing whatever you need them to do, or a landscape, but it's just slightly different. And then I bring those in, and the editor and the publisher and I and sales and marketing, we all kind of just talk about it because we're all geeks too at Orbit. So we're all just like fanning out a lot. And we decide, you know, who we want to go with. And we check in with the author. You know, we always kind of show the author what illustrator we're looking at. And working with authors, like, I really like to involve them in the process a lot, especially in sci-fi fantasy. Like everything's made up. They're the only source you have. You can't like go to the encyclopedia and look up like an alien world that like and
Yeah, what is this going to look like? What is this
Yeah,
supposed to
I don't
look
know.
like? Yeah.
So the editors absolutely talk to the authors before they do that initial, form. And I try not to overwhelm the authors with choices. Like, I don't want to send them 5 different illustrators because they don't necessarily, some do and some don't, but they don't necessarily understand like the whole thing about the target audience and all that kind of stuff. So, but we will send, when we decide on an illustrator in house, we will send the author that portfolio and make sure, they like it and it's cool. And if they have any notes that, sometimes that sparks ideas from the author. And then I contact the illustrator and just talk about all the nitty gritty, price, deadline, what I'm thinking about for the cover. People always ask like, do the illustrators have to read the manuscripts? Sometimes they like to. Sometimes there isn't a manuscript yet. A lot of things aren't fully written by the time we need to do the cover. So I will give the artist as much as I have, but I also don't expect them to like speed read through something. Like I already know, like we already know by that point in the process, like, okay, we want it to be this character, doing this on the cover. Here's as much detail as you need from the author or from the manuscript. Go, And some artists absolutely like they want to come up with their own ideas, and you just kind of know that, but they also know that they have to read really fucking fast. So they're like, I just want the manuscript. I'm like, okay, but it can't be 2 months. So I think the question was, how long does a book cover take? It depends.
Yeah, kind of a timeline. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, ideally 2 months start to finish, but it can be shorter, it can be longer. A lot of times, usually from when I contact an artist to when I want like thumbnails back is usually 2 to 3 weeks. That gives them some time to think about it and read whatever they want and
get some concepts down and
get some concepts down. But then sometimes that feedback is never, the problem with books is feedback is never like you don't know that you're going to get feedback from everybody in a week. Sometimes those thumbnails coming back start a whole nother conversation about, well, maybe this is a good way to go, or this is a good way to go, or that is a good way to go. And sometimes that conversation like accordions. So I always tell the artist, like I can't give you a final deadline sometimes, but like I'll stay in contact, like you have 2 weeks to do this part and then get it back. Like I try not to give people final deadlines because then sometimes when feedback doesn't come fast, it freaks them out. Which I understand. So it can accordion, but usually, I mean, the roughly 2 months, I'd say, start to finish.
Yeah. That seems really fast to me, but
well, also, it depends on the medium. I mean, people ask a lot, like, does it matter to me if you're working digitally or traditionally, like in paints? And it really doesn't. If I know you're working digitally, that it's not so much about faster or not, but I know that the artist can take bigger steps. There are some digital artists, especially concept artists, because they're so fucking fast. They want to go, they don't want to do thumbnails. They want to go straight to a final. And that's okay as long as they know that they might have to alter that and change that and work with us after. Like they don't want to do 5 sketches and then have us pick one, and they just want to go to a final. And if it's an artist I've worked with before, a lot of times that's okay, but they also know that they might have to change a lot of it. But
at least it is easier to edit the digital art. So
absolutely. So yeah. If it's traditional, I make the artist check in a lot more stages, even if it's just iPhone pictures of sketches or wherever it's going, because I never want somebody who's working traditionally to have to go backwards. Yeah. So I have them check in a lot more, and I make sure with my editors, and I've kind of educated the editors too, that if somebody's painting, once you approve something, you're not going back. Like, you can do some stuff in Photoshop, but you really don't want to start mucking with it too much.
Yeah, because that's a different process.
Yeah. So I mean, The deadlines are the same. Like I expect the same amount of work out of people in kind of the same amount of time, but I will ask the traditional artists to just check in more frequently.
Yeah, it is a different process. Yeah.
Yeah, for their own safety. Nobody wants to change oil paint.
Yeah, that's a whole nother ball of wax. Yeah. Let's see. How do you find the artist for cover assignments?
All kinds of ways. I consider it very much my job to know who's working all the time, and not just in sci-fi fantasy. Like I love pulling in people that haven't necessarily done sci-fi fantasy before, but are illustrators working in other fields. I work with a lot of concept artists that are, you know, maybe it's their first book cover, but they've been working in film or, you know, or video games for a while, or vice versa. Sometimes people who have been working in editorial, and I think they'd be great for a book cover. I mean, any year that you are allowed to attend events, I go to a lot of conventions, and I'm always looking at portfolios. I'm always on social media, kind of checking out, you know, new artists, things like that. My artists also, a lot of times, once I've worked with an artist, they recommend other artists that they'll vouch for, and that's worth a lot. Art directors in this scene are very close, and we all talk, and we're always sharing folks. Like if somebody does a great job for me, I know I'm not necessarily, like, books are slow. I'm not going to have another book cover for them right away, but I will, like, if somebody really impresses me, I will tell all the other art directors, I was like, this person was great. Like they did a great job and they were great to work with. And that's gold. Like if somebody says to me, you know, this person was great and I knew their work already, but they were kind of like in the ether, and somebody's like, they were great to work with that I trust, oh my God, they're like top of the list immediately. So
yeah, that kind of recommendation is really good. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, you can't beat that.
So it's a little bit of everything. I mean, also, I try to explain to artists, especially like within sci-fi fantasy, it takes a number of touches. You know, like I might see your work on social media once or twice. I might, you know, somebody might mention your name. I might meet you at a convention, or, you know, like it's never like I see someone, I'm like, oh, hire. You know, it's a slow build over time, you know. So I think people, especially this year when we're all stuck in the house and people are so focused on social media about, you know, oh my God, I need to get this many hits or this many likes or this many follows. Like it's not cut and dried like that. And I think like you're putting too much pressure on yourselves. Like it's a slow build over time, you know, and like people are talking about you when you don't even see it. So you just kind of have faith and keep putting your work out there, and don't obsess about, you know, like I saw recently, like there was a big fight about whether you should be retweeting or quote retweeting someone's art and like all this crazy. I'm like, guys, you're getting in the weeds. Like,
yeah. I do think though the pandemic has really affected everyone's ability to network though.
It absolutely has. It absolutely has. And I totally get that. I totally understand that. And you know, I think people latch onto the things that they can control. I think especially early in your career, you feel like you're screaming into the void as an artist. You know, you're emailing art directors, you're putting stuff on social media, you're trying to get your work out there, and you have no idea if it's working. Like you have no, like, you know, telepathy into the mind of an art director to know like that art director is just waiting for the right job to hire you for, as opposed to like they've never heard of you. You have no idea, you know. So one day, yeah, like artists talk about breaking through all the time. Like one day somebody's just going to call you and they're going to be like, okay, I have this job, and it's probably like some dream job that you know, like you didn't know if that was 6 months away or 2 days away, and that can be very difficult. So I think that's why, because there's not that like feedback of how well you're doing necessarily concretely, like people latch on to like how many likes they have and things like that, and they drive themselves nuts. So everybody take a deep breath.
Yeah.
On Twitter, it's all gonna be okay.
Let's see. Yes, what do you look for in an artist and their portfolio? And you've already talked a little bit about what you look for in an artist. That recommendation is really important. But what do you look for in a portfolio? Which is
not to say that every artist has been recommended. I mean, there's certainly artists that, especially because I try to find new talent all the time. It's a lot of times that I've reached out to an artist that I haven't met you know, or been recommended or things like that. So it's not only recommendations.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a good in, but yeah, but what do you look for in a portfolio?
What do I look for in a portfolio? Well, I mean, given a certain level of skill, like not everybody is, you know, at top book cover level. You know, at Orbit, I'm lucky enough that I can hire, you know, the best in sci-fi fantasy. So, you know, assuming that a portfolio is skilled to hire, which is a whole another conversation. What I specifically look for, you know, is I think the number one thing I talk to people about in portfolio reviews is visual hierarchy. And I write for Muddy Colors blog, so I've done articles on that. But what I mean by visual hierarchy is really, really important for book covers. And also, like, it's not bad for other kinds of art, but it's critical for book covers. Is you have to have like a really strong focal point, and also like how your eye moves around the piece. So not just, I mean, level one is like, do you have one strong focal point that stands out? Because when you're selling book covers this teeny online, you know, you need to have, it needs to work in a thumbnail, it needs to grab someone's eye. If it's too busy or it's too confusing or there's not like one really strong focal point, the human eye just like glosses over. It just like bounces off. So you need like a hook, literally. And a lot of people have beautiful portfolios, but their pieces don't look like covers necessarily because it doesn't have that visual hierarchy. It doesn't have that strong hook. And again, it gets complicated because there's a ton of different ways to do that. So, you know, like if you look at somebody like Greg Manchess, who's you know, an artist I think everybody knows in this field, like his work is abstract, but his focal point is always where it's the most rendered. Or like if you look at someone like a Dan Dos Santos, like his focal point tends to be like glowing, like he loves a rim light, you know, so, you know, like it's literally like glowing in the piece. And that's, you know, like how you control the visual hierarchy in your piece is actually the tools you go to again and again is what ends up making your style. Like artists obsess over like, what's my style? How am I going to find my style? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? You can't like find your style. You can't like search in your artistic closet and like pull out a style. You're like, yeah. It's just something that happens to you as you start to make the same choices over and over again. So if you control the visual hierarchy by color saturation over and over again, that becomes your style. Like somebody like a Miranda Meeks or a Wiley Beckert, they really control the eye because they have muted palettes, but that color saturation where it is, that's usually the focal point.
Yeah.
Or, you know, so like I would say that the difference between like who I hire and who maybe I like their work, but I don't hire is almost always visual hierarchy and how well they control that.
Yeah, because the book cover is a very specific kind of graphic.
Yeah, totally. And there's a lot of, I think that's a lot of times I talk to people and I'm like, these are great illustrations, but they feel like interior illustrations because they don't like an interior illustration. Once you've already bought the thing, whether it's a magic card or, you know, like, I mean, as opposed to like the sell pieces for Magic, but like the cards inside the decks or inside pieces or interior illustrations don't have the need to grab someone's eye.
Yeah, it's not that
with the same
front piece. Yeah.
Right. But also visual hierarchy is not bad on those pieces too. So it's not going to hurt your other work, but it's absolutely critical for book covers.
So what upcoming projects are you working on that you're allowed to talk about?
Ooh. Well, I can talk about it. I really enjoy, you know, kind of as the I'm not just the art director of Orbit, but the creative director. So, you know, I kind of decide who works on what. And if you're a good creative director, I think you tend to like pass on a lot of projects that would be great, but like you give them to your team and you save yourself for like the hand grenades. You're like throwing on the hand grenades all the time. You know, whether that's because it's a big book with big expectations and there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, or, you know, for whatever reason, like you can just smell the more difficult covers versus the more, and I tend to pass on the more like fun stuff to my team. But there are some authors that you will have to pry out of my cold dead fingers. So, you know, like since Nora Jemison has been with us, since N.K. Jemison she's only, you know, been published, or at least her main series have only been published by Orbit. I've always done her covers, and I I will always do her covers as long as I can. I mean, granted, if I try and I'm just not getting it, obviously, you know, I'll have somebody else on the team try it. But to date, I've done all her covers. And The City We Became was a cover that I designed completely myself. We didn't use a freelancer. And the mechanical, although the cover doesn't look very complicated, the mechanical was, I mean, it's 4 different colors of fluorescent ink and black instead of like a normal 4-color. So the actual technical setup for that mechanical was so hard that it almost killed me. Like, the file is so big it almost killed my computer, and the process of doing it almost killed me. But it also is done really well, and like there's blind spot gloss on it. There's like, you know, it's a picture of a bridge in New York City, but then if you shift it, there's like blind tentacles that you can just see in the gloss.
Yeah,
and
just
I really like, I love her and I love that book. So I really hit it out of the park. So the second book we're working on now, which is difficult because we don't have a confirmed title yet. So, but I'm already like kind of working on it because I know it's going to be a process, you know. So I'm waiting for the title right now, but I'm already working on it.
That's good. Yeah. So let's see. Who are some of the artists you've wanted to work with, but the right project has not yet come up?
Oh, wow. This is a good one. Oh, so hard. I mean, there's some folks that I just have loved their art for so long that like I pinch myself sometimes that I could just call them on the phone and like hire them for a thing, but I haven't been able to. So like I'd love to work with Brom. You know, Brom is such a sweetheart, and Brom and Lori Lee are such friends, but I've never been able to hire sorry, there's a bug in here. I've never been able to hire Brom for a project. You know, I've never worked with Donato. I've never worked with Ian McCaig. So like some of those like amazing folks that like are friends now, you know, and I'm lucky enough to get to talk to about art and things like that. Like I've never gotten to work with. So, you know, that's obviously a dream case, but I always have, I have my trusty sketchbook. I always have a list in here of artists that I really want to work with, and I haven't had a project for them yet. So when a project comes in, especially if it's like a hot project that we have to assign rather quickly, you know, I have a list of go-to folks, and I can't show you who's in the list, but sometimes I tell an artist, like, you know, I talk to artists a lot, and sometimes they just, you know, they're like, well, you know, you like, they don't believe you when you say you really love their art and you're just waiting for the right project, because sometimes that takes time. And I'm like, no, I swear you're on the list. I just, you know, like, you gotta, it's the right project has to come up. Like somebody like Jeremy Wilson, I saw his work develop, and I knew his work for years, and I was ready to hire him, and the right project just wasn't coming up. And finally we got a project that was just perfect for him, and the cover was great, and like everybody was happy, and like, you know, it finally worked. So like when you can finally fit the pieces together, it just, those are the wins for an art director. Like I love it. So
that's great.
I mean, naming names, I mean, I could go to the list, but I don't want to start a firefight online. Like,
yeah, don't.
You know, I don't mind
right.
dropping like the great.
Don't want to cause you any problem.
Yes, I don't want to cause you a problem. But there's a lot. It's a long list. I probably have like 30 to 40 people on that list of just names that like I want to be reminded of all the way. And it feels really good to like cross a name off that list, because that means that I finally got them on.
Finally got to work with that person.
Finally got them on something, so.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've actually gone through all of the notes.
Oh, great.
So
luckily I'm a fast talker. Yeah, I mean, I think if we're wrapping up, like, I think what you said about, you know, it being a tough year because, you know, the networking is tough and we're all stuck in the house, and, you know, we're all angry and scared and probably on social media too much, too late, doom scrolling, especially, you know, with elections looming, and, you know, no matter what side of the election, political spectrum or not at all you're on, you know, it's just a very stressful time. And I just want artists to know that, you know, the art directors in this scene and the fans of this scene are still there, and, you know, we're still supporting as much as we can, you know. Luckily people are still buying books, and they're very much buying sci-fi fantasy books. So I'm trying to commission as much as possible from artists, and, you know, like really trying to see as many people as possible. And, you know, people are figuring out, I help run a site that's a group of art directors sharing information called Drawn and Drafted. So I'm involved in Muddy Colors, which is the blog that like kind of sci-fi fantasy art education stuff, but also Drawn and Drafted is all about art business. So it's about art careers. You can just Google it. And we run a site called Dear Art Director, which is a bunch of art directors, probably like a dozen art directors answering questions anonymously that are posted from artists. So you could just go to Dear Art Director. And we're going to start doing online portfolio reviews. It's been very tricky to work out the tech, because that kind of stuff is very tricky, just making sure calendars are working. So we're alpha testing and beta testing right now. And we've got a couple of art directors on there in sci-fi fantasy, and we're going to open it up to more folks. We've been working, you know, with some of the leaders in this field, you know, Spectrum, Elixcom, things like that, to try and like pool resources and Muddy Colors and figure out how to make portfolio reviews more accessible for artists. Because even in a normal non-quarantine year, not everybody can get to conventions, and not everybody can get that like one-on-one interaction with professionals, not just art directors, pro artists too. So we're working on it. It's more complicated, I think, than if it had been easy, it would be a thing already. So we're working on it. Yeah. So if you want to know about that, just go to drawnanddrafted.com and sign up for the newsletter, because whenever we figure it out, we'll be messaging it out on that and stuff.
I'll probably sending my kids that direction. So
oh, totally. We have as much information as possible. Anybody, any kind of artist or even author, you know, we upload PDFs that are, you know, about social media and about contracts and about invoicing. It's just, you know, hearing so many questions from artists over and over and over again. So many art directors get the same questions over and over. We just wanted to upload that information from the art director's point of view, because, you know, there's so much information out there and so much good information out there from pro artists, but, you know, so many artists are trying to get hired by art directors. It made sense to pool some information from art directors and put that literally out there. Like, these are the people that you're trying to get hired by. This is what they're looking for.
Yeah, so, and that's really helpful information. Yeah.
Yeah, we try to share as much information as we can. So
yeah, well, I think this has been a really informative interview, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. And it's an honor, you know, to go back to the Chesley, which is why we're doing this. Like, it was an honor to get the Chesley. That's a tough category, because every year everyone nominated is wonderful, you know, and we're all friends too. And, you know, almost every year I know everybody in that category enough to, like, I could just text them right now, you know. So it seems it's funny, you know, and when I entered at Orbit, you know, Irene Gallo at Tor, who has won many Chesleys in this category, was such a mentor to me. You know, every year, like, I feel like I was cheering for her to win more than me, you know. So, I mean, I think that, you know, the award can pass around in the community, but it's, everybody in that list, like, always cares about the community so much. So it's really a win for the community every year, no matter who wins. So it's nice, but it's nice to see a lot of the stuff that I do get noticed. You know?
Get some recognition. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's definitely an honor, and I really appreciate everybody that voted, and the Chesley crew and everything.